Good morning, friends. Hello again. Last week, I posted a quick video just sort of explaining how election forecast works and why it is that we can be fairly confident that Biden is going to be the victor once all the votes are counted. But the big question that I got in follow-up to that, as well as on dozens of other posts over the weekend, was when are we actually going to know? When are we going to see results? And looking ahead to which states are likely to see results announced initially that will change significantly as different ballots are counted, I thought it might be helpful to just put together a little video that shows a plausible scenario for what election night might look like. So this is based off of a ton of information from a bunch of different resources. I'm going to give some links to 538's guides at the end if you want to read more about what they have to say about when results are going to be announced, which states are counting ballots in which ways, in what order, on what timeline, all of those sorts of things. Those links will be at the end. They provide an extensive resource that takes a lot longer to read than watching this video will, but I'm hoping that this video will give you at least an initial expectation of what you can expect from the election next week. So I'm not doing this on Facebook Live because I can't share a screen, and I thought that the visual was going to be really important on this one. So I'm pre-recording this. That said, I am going to post this up and I will do my best to answer questions in the comments as best as I can. So if there's something you're curious about, just drop a comment and I'll do what I can to answer you, which may just mean linking you to somebody who knows more than I do. The big disclaimer on this is that a lot of these predictions on when a state is going to announce or anything like that are all based on what different reporters have been told by the secretaries of those states. Now, that may not be how it actually goes. Individual counties may take longer than initially expected to count up their ballots and return a result. Technical issues can happen. All sorts of things that can make this go in a different order could come about over the course of the night. So I don't want you to take this too literally and call me tomorrow night at 9 o'clock and go, hey, you said by now this thing will have happened and it hasn't. Don't do that. This is a rough approximation. The main thing to look for is the sort of pattern that we're going to expect, which is that some really encouraging results are going to come out initially. Some of these southern states, their first round of results are going to look really, really good, and we're going to get really excited. And then it's going to shift heavy red. There's a bunch of states that we were expecting to go blue that their initial results are not going to look good, especially the Great Lakes region, states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, even Ohio to a certain extent. They're going to announce initial results that are going to look a lot redder than they actually will end up being, because they're going to announce election day results first and then count their mail-in ballots, which are going to be mostly Democratic. So we'll sort of go through this timeline, and I hope it answers that question. I hope it helps tomorrow night as you're watching the results to not feel so much anxiety around the 11 p.m. Eastern time hour, which I think is when it's going to be when things look really bad. I also expect that maybe when Trump will give a sham victory speech or something like that around 11 p.m. midnight Eastern time, because I think that's when the results are going to look best for him. And he's going to hope that everybody will just go to bed and then he can portray everything that happened after that as being fraudulent. But we all know the truth. The way that elections work is that when all the ballots are counted, whoever has the most wins that state. So the states are going to keep doing what they're going to do. They're going to do it professionally, and eventually we're going to have a result. And I think it's going to be a very strong Biden one. All right, so let's get into it and actually go through the timeline. So this is where we start. Right around 6 p.m. Eastern, and I'm going to give all these times in Eastern, but I've also thrown Mountain up because I expect most of the people who watch this will be in Mountain time. So I want that to be there as well, but I'm going to say Eastern times just for ease. So the first states to close are Indiana and Kentucky. The vast majority of polls in those states will close at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Now, there are a few counties and polling areas in those two states that will not close at 6 o'clock, that will wait until 7. So as a result of that, we don't actually get any results at this time, but we do have some areas where at this point, people can't vote anymore. So that's an important milestone. Moving on from there, At 7 o'clock, this is when a real good chunk of polls finally actually close. So what's left of Indiana and Kentucky close, and then we also see Vermont, Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia close. We also see the majority of Florida close, except for that little bit of the panhandle next to Alabama. And we see a bunch of counties in New Hampshire close, but a lot of them will stay open until the 8 o'clock hour. So we probably won't see any results out of New Hampshire during this hour. In fact, we won't expect to see a lot of results at all just yet. Some of these states may start to snap out some initial results, but they won't be very conclusive. Now, around 7:30, maybe when we get a big enough batch of votes to start seeing states get called. And if we do, they're going to be the super obvious states: Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia. These are all states that are not contested at all. Everyone knows how they're going to go. And so once we get an initial batch of results, especially if it's, a big dump of all the mail-in votes, something like that, I would not be unsurprised to see news agencies start to call some of these states. At 7:30, we also have a few other states closed: North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia. And then once we move into 8 o'clock, this is the first big batch of state closures. 16 states close, in addition to Florida and New Hampshire closing the remainder of their polls. And we may see some snap results come out right away in Georgia. The information that I've seen says that they're going to go ahead and release whatever they've pre-counted right away when polls close. And so that pre-count, which is going to be the early and mail-in votes, is going to look much better for Democrats, most likely, because we're the ones that have been showing about voting early. So those initial results coming out of Georgia are probably going to look really good. The same is true for North Carolina. I think we're going to see some really good initial results, but we want to be cautiously optimistic about that and wait for real numbers to come in later. Vermont might go ahead and release enough results to get called as well. No one is wondering which way that state is going to go. At 8:30, there's not really a lot that happens. Arkansas does close its polls at that point. We might see some of these easy states start to get called. This big red block right in the middle there, everyone knows that's going to go for Trump. As soon as they release some results, that might go ahead and get called. Now, the other thing that may happen is we may get some batch results from Michigan and Pennsylvania that are going to look worse. They're going to look more red than the rest of the state is going to ultimately end up being. And that's because of the opposite problem that I mentioned with Georgia and North Carolina. In Michigan and Pennsylvania, the early results are likely to be the in-person on election day votes, whereas the early votes and the mail-in votes are actually going to take longer to get announced. So in Michigan and Pennsylvania, we may see some initial results that look really bad. And that may make people feel nervous, especially because I've spent 4 months telling everyone that Pennsylvania is the state that matters. So just look out for that. We may see statewide of Maine, as well as Maine's first district, get called at this point, as well as basically most of the small states in the Northeast. No one really has any anticipation that that's going to go any way other than heavily blue. The 9 o'clock Eastern hour is basically when most of the Midwest at the middle of the country is going to go. So we see basically the entire Bible Belt. Actually, most of those states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas, and Kansas, mostly closed an hour earlier at 8 o'clock, but each of them had at least a few counties that stay open till 9, so they can't release any results until that point. So at 9 o'clock is when we'll actually start to see results coming out of those states, possibly. Now, Missouri might look confusing initially. I think it's going to get announced pretty early for Trump, even if it looks fairly competitive. I promise it's not. Don't get your hopes up. Missouri's going to be red. South Carolina may start to release some results, but it has the same problem as Georgia and North Carolina, which is that it's going to release its mail votes first, and it's going to look encouraging. So right about here is where Democrats are going to start getting way too excited. You're going to start seeing people posting about just a massive wave, all this kind of stuff. It may even look like Lindsey Graham's going to lose in South Carolina. People are going to start partying. Hold the champagne. Don't start getting excited yet. I promise those southeastern states are going to tighten up, if not shift to the red side. So just be cautious about that. At 10 o'clock, not a bunch happens. We have sort of those Rocky Mountain states and Nevada will close up. So Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and Nevada. We'll probably start to see results. Colorado is very good about releasing results in a timely manner, so I fully expect that we'll see some good enough results to feel good about the state. I think Minnesota will probably get called. Illinois will probably get called. New Mexico, I expect to look pretty good. It would probably get called pretty quickly. Meanwhile, I think Texas and Arizona are going to have that same issue as we've seen from other southern states. They're going to release their early votes first, and it's going to look good. It's going to get people excited. But again, temper that enthusiasm. Meanwhile, up in the Great Lakes, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all probably still looking red. Ohio might even start to look red. And people might start feeling concerned about that. But that concern is going to really increase in the next hour. The West Coast is going to close the rest of its polls, and things are going to start looking rough because those southern states are going to really start to shift back to the red side. What's going to happen is their initial mail votes that made it look blue, they're going to stop counting those, and they're going to do their in-person on election day votes. When they release those, it's going to shift it way to the red. And then after they're done counting those is when they'll go back to finishing counting the mail-in votes, including mail-in votes that are allowed to be received after election day. So look for sort of a wave in those southern states where they initially look blue, then shift to red, and then shift back to the middle, if not back to the blue side. So right about here, I think, is when I'm going to start getting calls from my mom, from Democrats, from people that I promised Biden was going to win, panicking and wondering what the hell is going on. I promise things are going to get better, but this is probably the worst it's going to look. It's right between like 11 o'clock and midnight. I think this is when everyone's going to start really freaking out, especially because the West Coast states haven't released results yet. So it looks like Trump is way ahead. And in fact, if Ohio looks red enough, if North Carolina looks red enough, if Florida looks red enough, I think this is when he's going to get on TV and say, I won, and send his supporters to bed. Don't fall for that, obviously. Don't let other people fall for it. There's still a lot of ballots left to count. This is not over yet. And in fact, over the next couple of hours, things already start to look good. The West Coast closes, and even though California is going to take an absolute eternity to count, even though New York is going to take an eternity to count, even though New Jersey is going to take an eternity to count, we don't need to wait for the final results in those states. We know how they're going to go. So we're going to go ahead and call those. We're going to call them Biden states. And now Biden is up to 234. He's probably pretty close. And depending on how some of these southern states have gone, Florida might have announced by now. They might have enough results to call it. Georgia might have announced by now. Arizona might have announced by now. These states may be close enough to call, but I'm going to err on the side of caution and say that they're not going to. So as we get, I think this is probably the map that a lot of us are going to go to bed with. I think it's going to look pretty close to tied, with Biden around 230, with Trump around 220. And everyone's probably going to go to bed with a lot of anxiety and not feeling good about the election, but they work tomorrow, so they need to go to sleep. I will be staying up all night. If you're staying up with me, look for me to be active on Facebook, and we can talk, and I can try to reassure you that it's all going to get better. So come Wednesday morning, I think the map is going to look much better. I think that some of those states that looked like they were going to go to Trump will have either been called for Democrats or at least be back in the realm of looking like they could go either way. I think Michigan is going to take a really, really long time to be called just because of the way that they're counting ballots. I don't think that's going to get called overnight. Maybe it will, but if not, that could still be open when we wake up Wednesday morning. I think Pennsylvania almost certainly will still be open. I think Ohio, Iowa could still be open, mostly just because they're going to be tight states. North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, hard to say. I think North Carolina will actually be called by Wednesday morning. I think Georgia will be called by Wednesday morning. I think Florida will be called by Wednesday morning, but I don't know which way those are necessarily going to go. So I'm leaving them as yellow, which is the polls are closed, but we don't have a result yet. I think Arizona is actually going to be the one where we can pop the champagne. I think Arizona is going to announce overnight at some point. And with the assumption that Michigan is eventually going to be blue, I think that's when I'm going to go ahead and pop my champagne and start celebrating, is when Arizona gets called. If Georgia or Florida beats Arizona to the punch, if those states announce first, if we see Florida called by a reputable source, which is basically means either the AP or 538, if they're calling Florida, I think we can all celebrate at any point during the night when that happens. It is nearly impossible for Trump to find a path to 270 without Florida. So that is, I'm not sure he's going to win. I'm not sure Biden's going to win Florida, but if he does, if that gets called, I think everything else is going to be a cascade after that. I think if Florida goes to Biden, Georgia certainly does. North Carolina certainly does. I think if Pennsylvania gets called, then that absolutely settles Michigan if that hasn't been called yet. I think Ohio and Iowa could honestly go either way, but I also don't think it matters. I think that other states are going to get called before those do, that reaches 270 for Biden. There are some other states that could absolutely go either way on this. I think this is the most likely final map, is something like this. I think Iowa and Ohio are really unsure. So those could certainly go the other way, which would drop Biden down to 351. But I think it's going to be in that range. I think 351 to 375 is where we're going to end up. There's a few other states that could certainly go either way. Montana is plausible for Biden to win. So is Alaska. They're long shots, but they're plausible. Texas is very competitive, more so than it's ever been before. Texas could go to Biden. That would be a great win. There's even states like Mississippi that aren't out of the realm of possibility if Biden does extraordinarily well tomorrow night. So this map could be very different than this, but I think it's going to be somewhere in this neighborhood. I think we will know for sure that this is where it's going to be around probably Friday. I think Friday-ish is when enough ballots will have been counted in states like Michigan to feel good about the results that we've got. Technically, there's states that are still accepting ballots a week after the election. Some of them it's even 2 weeks after the election. So we're not going to get final certified results for a long, long time. I think especially in states like Pennsylvania, where there may be a lot of court fights around it, we may be waiting for the state to say that that's the result. But I think what they do release, the initial results that we see, are going to be more than enough to feel like Biden won. We may know that late Tuesday night, and by late Tuesday night, I mean like 4 a.m. Eastern time, around 2 a.m. in Colorado. And if we don't know Tuesday night, I think we'll know on Wednesday. I don't see a situation where Florida and Arizona and Georgia haven't announced by Wednesday, and I'm probably sure one or more of those are going to go to Biden. So once they do, I think we feel pretty good about the election. If Biden's able to pull off something like Texas, I think we can call the election over. I don't think we're going to end up waiting for Pennsylvania. I still think it's the most important state. I think if it's going to come down to it and one state is going to make or break the difference, it's going to be Pennsylvania. But I also think it's going to be one of the last states we find out about. So rather than wait for that, we'll draw conclusions off of the states that we do know. And I think that come Wednesday morning, we're going to have a pretty good picture that Biden won this election. So just going back a couple of slides, like right here, when you see this map up on the news on Tuesday night, please don't freak out. Please don't start assuming the worst and catastrophizing. I promise it will get better later on. So I promise to throw up these links. I'm also going to put them in the video after I post it. But please check these out if you want to read more about it. 538 has done absolutely exhaustive research and has reached out to a lot of the election authorities in those states to find out, what their procedures are, when they plan to release which votes, all of those other sorts of things. So if you want to really know everything there is to know, that's where to go. I may also put up some information about, besides president, what's important, what results are important across the country, what results are close. I've got a list of House races, US House races that I'm watching closely. I'm obviously watching the Senate very closely, but I think that come Wednesday morning, we're all going to be in good shape and feeling really good about the election. And then we all just hold our breath to see what Trump does about it. So that's what I've got for you today. Again, feel free to ask me any questions you have. I'll do my best to answer them. Most likely, I'm just going to refer you to one of these two links from 538 or copy something that they've said and tell you to go read it if you want more information. Because they have a much more intimate knowledge of individual state procedures than I have. I know the stats, I know the numbers, but I don't know that sort of local knowledge that is necessary to predict when a state is going to get called. So this was my best guess as to what the night is going to kind of look like. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to when counties get the work done. And that may happen on any sort of timeline. So The best advice that I can give you is don't freak out. Make sure that you are watching reliable news sources like the AP or 538. I would even go so far as to say ABC News would probably be safe to watch. The reason I say ABC is because ABC, of course, is owned by Disney, which also owns 538 at this point. A lot of people don't know that. So 538 is going to be feeding information directly into ABC's decision desk. And so if ABC is calling a race, it's probably because 538 told them it was safe to do so. And what that means is that 538 is 99.5% sure that that's the way that it's going to go. And so I think if they're calling it, I would feel safe that that's ultimately what the final result in that state is going to be. I hope this helps. I hope that it eases your anxiety. I hope that you can go into tomorrow night and watch these results just a little bit informed and just a little bit primed for what sort of results you can expect to see, so you don't read too much into the early favorable results or the later doomsday results, and you wait for the final results, which I am pretty darn sure is going to be that Biden has won. So thank you, and I hope to talk to you soon. Happy Election Day.